right, Brian, you've got the floor.
Michelle, for discussion sort of around what, how we make decisions as watershed groups. It's not easy, and that's the reason I asked the question. I used to be with the Deerfield River Watershed Group, and we had a few issues where it was really tough to figure out, how our mission and values should inform our decisions surrounding a particular issue. Oftentimes, these groups start with a particular goal in mind, and then once the group is started, you sort of have to figure out what you want to be and how your mission is going to guide you in decision making. One clear example is oftentimes recreation and ecological needs can be at odds with one another. A simple example would be on the Fort River. We would love for it to be more passable by canoe and kayak, but there are tons of blowdowns across the river. We know that large woody debris is really important for river ecology. And so we've been thinking about how could we balance the desire to make the river more accessible so that more people appreciate and care for it with the fact that we know that that large wood is serving an important role. So anyhow, that's just a side note that I wanted to sort of, I'm interested in exploring further, especially with this group. So I've got the mission up here. I'll just give you a second to read it. So it's pretty standard language, but it does speak to our interest in both ecological integrity, as well as recognizing that this is a cultural and human resource, the Fort River watershed and the river itself. So our mission is really focused to the river itself, again, because in past watershed groups I've been in, it was just quote unquote watershed. And then when economic things came up, they said, well, the economy's in the watershed. And when we came up with our mission statement, we really wanted to be clear that the rivers and tributaries are our main focus. And to the extent that land management impacts the rivers, yes, we're interested, but really to keep that focus on rivers and tributaries within the watershed. So really water resources are our main focus. And here's just a map of the watershed. You can see a few main tributaries draining in total 5 different towns: Shutesbury, Pelham, Belchertown, Amherst, and Hadley, come together as the Fort River right in the middle of Amherst. And sort of the bulk of Amherst is drained by the Fort River watershed. And it's a really fantastic watershed. It's sort of your classic New England watershed in that its headwaters are defined by lots of forest, steep headwater streams, a lot of really healthy cold water fisheries. There are some municipal water reservoirs in the upper reaches as well. So it's an important municipal water resource. Moving downstream, some of these photos are from the lower reaches. It's in general a well-loved recreational resource. And I just want to check to make sure. Can folks see my mouse here? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. I'm going to try and grab my laser pointer. All right, so the Emily Dickinson Trail is a trail along the river right in the middle of the watershed. Amethyst Brook is a really popular conservation area. And a Fort River Trail is this fully accessible mile loop trail that is managed by the Fish and Wildlife Service. So there's a lot of recreational assets developed within the watershed. And in addition to that, similar to the upper reaches of the Mill River and Cushman Brook, there's a really active put and take fishery in the lower reaches, so lots of stocking and recreational fishing. I alluded to paddling. This is a section of the Fort River behind Kilwest Field. If you've ever used the sports fields on Stanley Street, it's a really windy, beautiful stretch of river. And this is my friend Nick Reich and his kids canoeing along here. And so it is canoeable. About probably 7 or 8 months a year. It's a little tricky in the dead of summer, although not this summer because it was so wet. And in addition to that, there are many really popular swimming holes. So this is one of the swimming holes right in the middle of town. There are 3 or 4 places that are popular on a hot summer's day. This particular one on a hot day probably gets 100 to 200 users throughout the day, not all at one time. So again, really popular swimming areas. Another popular one is Groff Park, right in the middle of the town of Amherst. So we're interested as a watershed group in enhancing and promoting these recreational opportunities recognizing that the people are an important part of what makes the watershed great, and that we are not a wildlife refuge for the exclusive use of wildlife, and we're hoping that we can sort of enhance ecological integrity at the same time as enhancing recreation. And a key way is, of course, water quality. Many times throughout the summer, this particular swimming hole, the bacteria levels exceed the safe swimming threshold. And so a big goal of our group is to bring bacteria levels throughout the watershed back down to where recreation is safe at all, not at all flows, but at least at low flows and base flows. In addition to a goal of enhancing recreation, we've been really involved in developing community science and volunteerism throughout the watershed. So this year we're hosting our 3rd annual watershed cleanup, and we do that in coordination with the Connecticut River Conservancy. In addition to that, we do water sampling, so biweekly water sampling, one of the upstream and one of the downstream recreation areas, and I'll show those data in just a second. And again, the main contaminant of concern is bacteria. We're really interested in enhancing recreation within the river. We're also interested in nutrient data and starting to do some nutrients, but really our first primary concern is making the river swimmable and usable for humans at all times of the year. And then last, we're organized and ready and poised for advocacy when the opportunity arises. So far in our 3-year existence, we haven't really had the need to launch any major advocacy campaigns, but we have a clear mission and we're sort of prepared to do that when the time comes. A little bit of background that I probably should have started with. So we're an all volunteer organization, and we've got about 10 active board members and an email list of about 200 people of folks who have either volunteered or come to cleanups. We are not a 501c3. We are a affiliate of the Connecticut River Conservancy. So this is a Connecticut River watershed-wide group. Folks are probably familiar with it. And it's been a really great arrangement for us. We came together in 2019 surrounding 1, persistently high bacteria levels in the river, and 2, the opportunity to conserve a big parcel of land through which there's 2.5 kilometers of river that I'll show you in a minute. And so one thing I'd like to sort of just be an evangelist for is that this arrangement has been fantastic for us. We don't do any accounting, we don't pay for insurance, we do almost no administrative tasks at all. We pay a small overhead to Connecticut River Conservancy on all the money that comes into our group, and in return we get tenfold services in return. So it's been a really great arrangement for a small group like ours. Anything other background things? I think that's it. I want to finish up, not too much time to leave time for questions. In collaboration and coordination with Connecticut River Conservancy, we've been doing biweekly water sampling since 2020. And we do it at 2 locations. So here's our watershed map again. The upstream location is the Amherst Brook conservation area, and the downstream location is Groff Park. The locations are separated as the crow flies by very little distance, probably only 2 miles, but a lot changes in the interim, whereby the Amethyst Brook is really representative of headwaters. It's very cold, very clear, lots of native brook trout swimming and darting around there as you visit. And the Groff Park Reach is much warmer, much more nutrient rich. You can see it by the submerged aquatic vegetation in the river, and persistently higher bacteria levels. So here in both these plots, this is 2020, this is 2021. We're looking at dates on the x-axis, bacterial levels in coliforming units per 100 milliliters. Don't worry about the units, just know that higher bacteria is bad. And what you can see is these red dots are almost always above this threshold for safe swimming. So these red dots are at Groff Park, and the blue triangles are typically below, with the exception of high flows like this late August, early September date. In 2021, we saw similar patterns with, in general, Groff Park having higher bacteria loads. And we're really trying to pin down the exact cause of that. We believe it's an urban tributary that I'll show you a little bit more about in a second. So zooming out, whole watershed, we, similar to the Lake Warner group, we're really interested in sort of total nutrient loads. These are data from the 2019 Sample Palooza. So this is, again, as a Connecticut River Conservancy organized event where they sample all the tributaries of the Connecticut River, or as many as they can. And here you can see in terms of phosphorus concentrations, the Fort River was the worst in 2019. It's consistently bad. And so this is something we're really interested in trying to get to the root causes of and figure out how to remediate. In 2019, our first year, we commissioned the Conway School of Landscape Design and Planning to do a full watershed plan for us. And so we've got a sort of laundry list of things we're hoping to check off and start to make some improvements on both bacteria and phosphorus. One of the biggest issues we believe is this urban watershed outlined in pink here. This is the Brook watershed, and it drains parts of downtown Amherst and all of Amherst College campus. And water samples from there taken during the summer, the bacteria concentrations are typically labeled as too numerous to count, and the cutoff is 2,400. So our Groff Park, Fort River samples in the mid 200 to 300 levels. These Brook samples have been in excess of 2,400, so 10 times higher than Groff Park. And so even though the discharge of this little stream is low, the concentration is so high that we think a lot of the bacterial loading to the river may be coming from the Brook. And here's just an image to see what part of it looks like. A lot of it is culverted. A lot of it is parking lot runoff. And there's been some coliform DNA done there, but it's still inconclusive as to the exact cause. But Anna Martini, an Amherst College professor, and her students have been doing a lot of work this summer to try to pin down where the bacteria is coming into the Brook to help us better remediate it. In addition to that, there's a big EPA-funded remediation project happening right now, doing a floodplain reconnection work on the lower Brook. So lowering the lower floodplain right before it drops into the Fort River, with the hope that during high flows, some of the sediment and nutrients will be sequestered on the floodplain once it can access its floodplain again. The last thing, and again, this was one of the impetuses for the group starting, is this Hickory Ridge Golf Course. This is a 150-acre property right in the middle of town. It includes 2.5 kilometers of river running through it, and a really exciting opportunity to provide recreation and outdoor access and river access to people in town. And it's not just any folks, it tends to be located, just happens to be located in sort of the highest concentration of lower income housing in town, and close to environmental justice communities. And so I've labeled the names of some of these complexes where there's some more affordable housing. And in addition to this being the more affordable housing in town, it's also probably the part of town with the least access currently to outdoor recreation. And so the prospect of having this golf course become public access is really exciting. And the town of Amherst is almost there on it. And so we'll be really engaged in part of the sort of river access, river restoration, that opportunities that this presents. And so there's already golf cart paths through the course. So really exciting opportunities for accessible recreation paths. This is not actually a picture of the golf course. It was just a nice picture of a golf cart path. I'll show you a few photos of the golf course. So here's one showing elevation. The color corresponds to meters above sea level. The river here is about 40 meters above sea level. And the color, you can see there's very little elevation or topography throughout much of the course. Part of the reason it's closing is because the private golf course company was just fed up with it flooding all the time, and they lost a lot of money. And of course, it was being made worse by climate change and the moisture conditions here. So this is what it looks like now. A lot of the river is unvegetated, a lot of riprapped or reinforced sort of engineered banks. So we're excited to see the banks return to more natural conditions. Here's another example of a bend in the river here. This is what the river looks like about probably 20 days a year. So it's really prone to flooding. It's serving a great service to the community by absorbing floodwaters. It's a natural, probably floodplain forest location. You can see here on the right side of the picture, this is silver maple growing out of the floodplain, one of the few species of trees that can tolerate prolonged inundation. And so you can already see it's a natural floodplain. And it's not a localized issue. This is a friend was at a national planning conference right as I was getting into this, and she said, Brian, there was a whole day event just looking at what are we going to do with golf courses as they revert to public spaces. And the reason for this is not just climate change, but more largely demographics. Baby boomers are starting to age out of golf. The Tiger Woods phenomenon is ending. and just less and less interest. And so this will be something on the horizon in communities throughout the country, presenting opportunities for recreation and river restoration. And so with that, I'll say thanks and ask what questions folks have.
Wow. Well, if nobody minds, I have a question. You mentioned that your main goal is the reduction of bacteria. What kind of strategies are you guys planning to employ for that?
Yeah, great question. So the hope is that this little tiny urban watershed is our main culprit. And if that's the case, there's already a consulting report that's come out from 2 years back, highlighting some best management practices we might use. They range from anything from there's a sewer pipe, a submerged sewer pipe where down cutting of the river channel has actually exposed this sewer pipe, which may just be leaking into the stream. So basically sealing up that sewer pipe. And a lot of it is going to be around stormwater management. So figuring out ways to capture as much of that stormwater as possible. One thing that's in our favor is that a lot of the land in the watershed is Amherst College campus. And so hopefully there'll be a well-heeled partner that'll be interested in helping to clean it up. But yeah, stormwater retention and things like that. And as I mentioned, this floodplain reconnection project, we'll see if it has any impact. I see Ken has a hand raised as well.
Hi, yeah, this is Ken from the Conway School. Nice to see you. I'm curious, your data go back to 2020 and what you showed us. I assume you have been testing going farther back. And I'm just curious if there have been any correlations with any of the changes in behavior or activities since COVID kicked in. Do you see any reflection in the time of COVID to bacteria or other levels of pollution in the water, and what that, if it's true, if it might indicate any potential solutions?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, Ken. There's going to be about 16 million COVID studies in the next 20 years on everything from education. And I hadn't even thought about water quality. Our data set only goes back to 2020. We just reformed it in 2019. But the Connecticut River Conservancy, who runs our samples, they have a massive data set going back many, many years at watersheds through, sub-watersheds throughout the Connecticut River watershed. And so it'd be really interesting to see if there have been any systematic changes. It's a great idea for grant proposal.
Thank you.
And I should probably wrap up, as I think I was supposed to end it at 12:40.
Okay.
I have
go ahead.
one quick question, and maybe it's not quick answer, is how did you get into your arrangement with the Connecticut River Conservancy?
Yeah, I think I can make that answer quick. I had been with the Deerfield River Watershed Association, and our group was sort of suffering from low energy. And one way that we sort of helped solve some of the issues of having excess administrative duties was to merge with CRC. When we formed the Fort River group, I said, it's been working great for the Deerfield River. What do y'all think? Do we want to have a treasurer? Do we want to have a bank account? Do we want to file taxes? And the answer to all those questions was no. And so, frankly, it's been much more than just lack of aggravation. It's been really nice to have CRC as an active partner and, to be just tied into everything they're doing. I found there's been very little downside and lots of upside.
I can definitely second that. We've been working with the Connecticut River Conservancy for 7 years, I think. And so just having a lab for somebody to do the sampling consistently is really a great asset to watershed groups. I'd also say, in response to Ken's comment, that the frequency of sampling is also extremely important. If you're sampling every 2 weeks, it's not going to be as good as it is if you're sampling every week. You could be missing storms. It's highly correlated to sort of flow and overland flow and timing of your sample. So it looked like Fort River was the highest, small watershed in that collection from Sampaloosa, and it was on that day. But I think systematically over the season that Mill River is way higher, and Lake Warner is even sort of uncharacteristically represented as a low value there, where it does actually have a low value in relation to the Mill River, but it's still higher than it was at 20. It's usually running higher than that. Thanks a lot, Brian. That was fabulous. And I've been inspired by the Fort River since the beginning. We had already been at it for 5 years, and I was like, wait a minute, someone's starting something that we were doing already? What? But it's such a nice thing to have a sister watershed, somebody who's right next to you, who's also trying to have, where you have mutual goals. And, as a watershed person, I always think about paired watershed analyses that are done, all over the place. What's happening here and what's happening here. So it's great to have a partner. Thanks very much.